Explain like I'm five. What stops countries from secretly developing nuclear weapons? What I mean is that nuclear technology is more than 60 years old now. And I guess there is a pretty good understanding of how to build nuclear weapons and how to make ballistic missiles. So what exactly stops countries from secretly developing them in remote facilities? The biggest barrier in building a nuclear weapon is getting the necessary fissile material, the nuclear fuel. Everything else is pretty simple by modern weapons technology standards. This means either uranium, which can be mined and then refined into weapons-grade uranium, or plutonium, which doesn't occur naturally. Refining uranium involves operating hundreds of centrifuges that require a ton of electricity, and then it still takes forever. It's something that a country could theoretically do in secret. But in practice, if you start buying up a bunch of parts for building centrifuges and setting up high-voltage electricity supply to a remote facility, that's something that intelligence agencies are going to take note of. Getting plutonium involves operating nuclear reactors and reprocessing the fuel. And while you could maybe disguise a reactor used primarily for making plutonium as a civilian reactor designed for making electricity, it's something the international inspectors would probably notice. And if you say, we're not letting in any inspectors to inspect our definitely civilian nuclear program, don't worry, stop bothering us. That's something that intelligence agencies are also going to notice. All of those things could theoretically be done in secret and covered up with complicated and expensive shell companies and long timelines. What cannot be covered up is the testing of a device. A nuke going off, even underground, is impossible to hide. If you cough at the same time, no one will know. At that point, you might as well just shit yourself. Iran has been trying to develop nukes for a while. Around 2010, the CIA developed a virus called Stuxnet and infected almost every device in the world in the hopes of it spreading to air-gapped Iranian centrifuges that were being used to manufacture nuclear weapons-grade uranium. The virus was programmed to look for a specific device firmware and increase the speed of the device very slightly while under-reporting to the user to ruin the process. This only came out because the virus was detected by IT workers around the world. Imagine all the things all the governments do to stop their enemies that we never hear about. Remote facilities is putting it rather lightly. It takes essentially an entire factory town to set up a nuclear weapons production enterprise. It's an incredibly complex process requiring a huge number of personnel with specialized skills, very specific technologies that are internationally restricted, and an enormous amount of energy and material. Sellafield in the UK is not exactly small. Neither is Dimona or Los Alamos or Sarov. They are large towns or cities. You are not hiding that. Also, having a nuclear weapon is by itself a huge headache for those who have them. How are you going to ensure no one has access to them except you? How will your neighbors react to you having the bomb? Your taxpayers. It's a very heavy sword to wield. Explain like I'm five. Pizza has tomatoes, meat, veggies, bread, and such, so it has a little of everything in the food groups. Why is it not considered healthy? People tend to eat way too much pizza. The amount of vegetables on pizza are also pretty minimal. This means people end up eating a lot more bread and cheese than they ought to in a meal. aka the macro profile is unbalanced. Too much carbs, not enough protein and specific fats. Too much saturated fat from the cheese. That's where most of the calories are. Of course, it depends a bit on pizza style. Though the white flour dough isn't great either. The sauce is also full of added sugar, and the meats are generally processed. Processed foods combining starch, fat, salt, and sugar heavily promote overeating. In modern society, unhealthy eating isn't about not eating enough stuff. It's mostly about eating too much. Pizza has too much cheese and bread. That's bad for you, and no amount of veggies in sauce form or otherwise will fix that. Pizza can be healthy for sure, but most people don't order it that way. How many people do you know that order a healthy, moderate mix of meat and veggies with just a little cheese and a light sauce, versus people ordering, say, a meat lover with extra cheese? Explain like I'm five. The Celsius was designed without regard to the temperature of absolute zero. Why does the exact value of absolute zero only have 2 decimal points in the Celsius scale? Isn't it quite a big coincidence that this value would only have 2 decimal points on a scale that puts the temperature value of water boiling and freezing at whole numbers? The boiling and melting points of water aren't that precise because it varies with atmospheric pressure. While the original definition of the Celsius referred to those, the current definition is actually defined based on the triple point of water, which is a more reproducible standard, and absolute zero, which is a universal constant. Actually, the current definition is to do with the Boltzmann constant, but that's unimportant for our purposes. Basically, the reason why there's only 2 decimal places of precision is because that's the definition of the Celsius. Similarly, an inch was redefined as 2.54 centimeters exactly. An inch didn't happen to magically be 2.54 centimeters exactly. They just redefined the inch to be that. Before, the inch was based on the yard. How long was a yard? Well, there was an object in the British Parliament that was the definition of exactly how long a yard was, at least until Parliament burned in 1834. In 1855, they created a few new yardsticks and gave a couple to the United States. That was how long a yard was. By the 1930s, the UK, US, and other countries decided to standardize an inch at 2.54 centimeters based on the 1927 light wave definition of the meter. It was called an industrial inch at the time. Later in the 1950s, the meter was redefined based on atomic terms, and the US, Canada, UK, AUS, NZ, and South Africa all agreed to make the international yard be 0.9144 meters. This meant that the international yard was 0.002 millimeters longer than the imperial yard, 2/millionths of a meter longer. In the beginning, we would just have a reference item to measure. Later, we'd go with natural stuff like the melting temperature of water at sea level. While that was more reproducible, as Jansen Cheng notes, it varies with atmospheric pressure. As we make a more exact definition, we often make it fit exactly. You might say, so we're knowingly changing it? Sort of, but mostly no. When we're updating something inexact, we don't truly know what the previous definition was. Let's say that we had 3 of the prototype yardsticks. We measure one at 0.91451 memp, another at 0.91432, and another at 0.91438 members. That averages out to 0.91444033333. Should we define a yard as that average and have a repeating decimal? Or should we just say, yay, we clearly don't exactly know what a yard was, and it makes a lot more sense to make it exactly 0.9144 embers than to go with some average that is inconvenient and doesn't really have more truth behind it. Likewise, if the melting point of water isn't precise, then it makes sense to go with something that offers exactness at points that are precise and is basically just as precise a definition of the melting point of water as we had before. The Celsius scale was already in use when we began to realize that applications of the gas laws and other aspects of physics imply an absolute 0 point in temperature. So we figured out theoretically that it is very close to minus 273.15 C. Then later, we redefined the Celsius scale in terms of absolute 0 and the triple point of water, and dropped the boiling point as an anchor. Now, absolute 0 is minus 273.15 by definition. The freezing point of water is still generally at 0 C, depending on pressure, impurities, etc. But the boiling point is no longer keyed to 100 and is actually closer to 99.98 torr C. Just to note, they redefined it yet again in 2019, and now the unit is defined entirely using the Boltzmann constant and the other fundamental SI units. I think the part about the anchor at absolute 0 remains the same, though. Because nowadays, we define the Celsius scale in terms of Kelvin and not the freezing and boiling points of water. 0 degrees C is defined to be exactly 273.15 degrees K. To save everyone the search, this puts the true freezing temperature of water at 0.2519 degrees and boiling 99.97 degrees Celsius. These are both very pressure dependent, though. Explain like I'm 5. Why is it okay for cars to have a metal logo on the steering wheel even if the wheel has an airbag? Isn't it a safety concern? The airbag container is designed perforated, so it rips a specific way, leaving the emblem intact. It's usually not metal, but chrome-plated plastic. Safety is a major design factor in airbag systems, and the engineers just don't let some designer put something dangerous in the system. Had a low-speed accident that popped the airbags. I had a nasty bruises on my thumbs. When the airbag deploys, that part of the steering wheel rips open and gets pushed to the side, since it's still attached. The airbag rushes towards your head, and all that extra leather gets swung towards your hands. In fact, the only injury from that accident was my hands getting hit by the flaps from the steering wheel. Yeah, people often forget that the goal of airbags is not to make crashes comfortable, but survivable. The safety hazard from the likely plastic emblem is not terrible, but not 0. Explain like I'm 5. How do skyscrapers, especially ones with flat glass sides, manage rainwater? I'm talking about big vertical-walled glass-sided skyscrapers like this one or this one. When it rains, the vertical sides of these must catch a lot of rain, which runs down the windows. So by the bottom of the building, you should get the accumulated water catchment of the 50-plus stories above, which would be a pretty significant amount of water, I assume. How do these buildings manage the water hitting their sides and running down so that it doesn't completely drench everyone on the street? I appreciate other buildings without smooth glass sides have opportunities to capture water as it falls down the building, like this one, but was walking through London in the rain today, wondering why I wasn't getting wetter. The glass tower I work in has a very clever design. The water runs inside the building through the ineffective seals, down the interior walls, and onto the carpet. Evaporates in a day or two once inside. HVAC helps. It took me a minute to realize this is not a good design. I was picturing those glass waterfalls in office lobbies that have water running down a large glass sheet into a pool. The water is collected into pipes and then discharged into the environment. In some cities, you can connect into storm drains, but often you discharge it onto the street. It only takes a small seam in the glass to let the water curl under and into a collection pipe. From the ground, you can't see the seams. Wouldn't it be more effective to send it directly outside the environment? Only if the front fell off, obviously. Water volume on a vertical panel isn't as much as you'd think. It's not horizontal surface area. Also, it's not a sheet of glass from top to bottom. They are panels. These panels allow a lot of water to slow down on the way or go behind the framing and also sit at the bottom of the glass due to surface tension. All these things slow it down enough to let evaporation also occur. And for water that doesn't, it runs into gutters or channels and then to sewers or stormwater drains, like it does on a house. The water that runs down the glass is going much slower than the water that is falling straight to the ground from the sky. Around areas where it would otherwise shed onto people, it's caught in channels that drain it elsewhere, just as on a building with any sort of pitched surface. Well, that's another episode of Explain Like I'm 5 in the books. I really appreciate all of you who made it this far into the video. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, it would really help the channel out a lot if you gave the video a thumbs up, subscribe, or leave a comment down below. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.